Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. After a pivotal Colin Atkinson flashback, Kane Ashby will declare that the plan is dead, leaving Phyllis Summers in shock, according to the Young and the Restless synopsis on Tuesday, August 26th. On Tuesday's YNR episode, Kane will remember caring for Colin as he approached the end of his life while on the train. Since the twins have been reluctant to talk, Kane will decide to create a video that explains everything. Kane will film a speech on his cell phone about how Charlie and Maddie Ashby were born miracles. Kane developed Aristotle Dumas to shield himself in the event that he crashed and burned because he was worried he wouldn't succeed. Kane ended up disappointing his family even though he couldn't risk failing them. Phyllis will finally appear and listen in around the corner as Kane laments the gap he built and thinks back on the great moments he missed. After Kane finishes recording, Phyllis will appear moved by his sincere remarks and clear her throat a little. Kane will appear annoyed that Phyllis is listening in, but she will encourage him to submit that footage. Phyllis will believe that he should present this explanation to the twins and then give them time to process it, despite Kane's concerns that it might be too little, too late. Kane will also be urged by Phyllis to distance himself from Lily Winters. Kane will acknowledge Victor Newman's most recent maneuver once Phyllis notices the letter on the table. Phyllis will understand that Victor is blackmailing Colin once Kane explains his most recent deception of the woman who owned the chateau and vineyard. Kane will appear conflicted about his feelings for his father, while Phyllis will defend Colin and claim that he must have given that woman the time of her life. In order to get confirmation that she has been reading up on artificial intelligence, Kane will also question Phyllis if she completed the study he requested. Phyllis will essentially question how nasty Kane's AI scheme is, but he won't go into specifics just yet. Kane will instead encourage Phyllis to return so they may talk about his objectives over dinner. After Phyllis departs, Tristan Rogers' last appearance as Colin, clearly taped before to the actor's untimely death, will cause Kane to reminisce about additional past events. Fans will notice in those memories that Colin urged Kane to tell his family the truth about Dumas and warned him that time was running short. Kane promised Colin that he would drop Dumas when the time was appropriate, but instead chose to wait and do things his own. Colin desired Kane's assurance that he would bury Dumas indefinitely. Kane will break a glass back in the present and eventually call Phyllis. Kane's statement that the plan is dead and that he is not pursuing it will leave Phyllis speechless when she responds to it at the park. According to previews for The Young and the Restless, Phyllis will have to work quickly to preserve her future in the upcoming episodes. In the Chancellor home, Kane sat by himself and gazed at the unopened bourbon glass. He felt as though the walls were pushing in on him because of the gloomy illumination in the living room. Even though he had vowed 100 times not to think about it again or to keep reliving the past in his head, he couldn't stop it tonight. He hadn't anticipated how hard the flashback had hit him. He kept hearing Colin's voice, his father's voice, which brought him back to times he wished he could forget. "The plan is dead," Kane said in a whisper to himself. The words shook from his lips like a confession he wasn't prepared to make aloud. It must be dead. Colin always managed to drag Kane back into his father's shadow just when he felt like he had completely overcome it. All of the memories of his father's plots, deceptions, and half-truths that usually contained more harm than Kane could bear suddenly returned. He recalled Colin's arrogant expression and the way he would smile whenever he presented him with temptation. Kane detested that aspect of himself that occasionally yearned to listen, to give in, to think that perhaps his father was wiser than he was. However, Kane was aware that the reality was more sinister. Colin was just interested in himself. Kane had only ever been involved when it suited his own self-interested agenda. With a long, weary sigh, he reclined on the couch. He listened to the silent ticking of the wall clock as he briefly sought to center himself. However, even that was unable to erase Colin's laughing from his mind. After closing his eyes, Cain found himself in the middle of that memory, where he could see his father resting casually against a table and attempting to convince him that everything would be okay if he simply followed the plan. At the time, Cain had wished to trust him. He had a strong desire to clean up the mess that had been growing in his life. However, Colin's gift was opportunity veiled as devastation rather than redemption. "The plan is dead," Cain said again, more firmly this time, as though he were defying himself to accept it. He didn't take a sip of the bourbon, but his palm stroked the glass. Not this evening. He couldn't risk losing command. Not when his body was already screaming at him from every nerve. He had already spiraled too many times for his children, Charlie and Maddie. Their father's disintegration was the last thing they needed. He had assured them that he was getting better and moving on from the past. However, given that Colin's shadow was still hanging over them like a rain cloud, how could he? He remembered how many times Lily had cautioned him. Her voice, which was steadier and softer than his father's, returned to him. When Colin attempted to take him under, she was the one who tried to pull him back to solid ground, acting as his anchor throughout the entire time. "Cain, you're better than this." He could just hear her saying, "You don't have to be him." Even still, Cain hadn't been able to fully break free from Colin's hold, even after all the times she had been correct. It was about blood, family, and the perverted allegiance that accompanied it, not simply the plots. Cain got up and paced the room like a man battling himself, running his hands through his hair. He kept thinking about the specifics of the previous plan, including the lies, the promises, and the ill-conceived notion that perhaps if he followed his father's lead, something positive would happen. Instead, he was left standing here feeling hollow and burdened by the regret of decisions he should never have made. The flashback served as a warning in addition to being a memory. He had already witnessed the devastation, and he knew he would walk right back into it if he continued to explore the idea. It wasn't that easy, though. The trouble was that Colin never stayed gone, no matter how much he tried to convince himself that the scheme was dead. His father kept coming back, always had a new ploy, and always had a new opportunity to present to him. Anger was boiling up in Cain's chest, bitter and burning. He had vowed he was done how many times? How many times had he made promises to himself, Lily, and his children that he would never let Colin to bring him down again? Even yet, he was still trying to bury something that wouldn't stay buried, still restless, and still haunted. When the tumbler of bourbon finally reached his hand, Cain swirled the liquor within and put it down again. He considered going up to Colin, tracking him down, and ending it for good. However, he was aware of how that tale would unfold. Colin never really disappeared. He seemed to be a ghost that thrived on chaos and watched other people fall apart. Colin would only be able to tighten his hold if Cain attempted to follow him. No, Cain had to make a different decision this time. He had to leave, not merely verbally, but physically. The scheme had to remain dead, not merely die. However, leaving meant confronting the more difficult reality, the debris Colin had already left behind. Cain destroyed trust, destroyed bridges, and damaged people's reputations. He considered how he was now viewed in Genoa City. Others continued to view him as the idiot, Colin Atkinson's kid, who would never be free of the same poison, while others continued to see him as a guy attempting to improve. With the weight of that reality bearing down on him, Cain tightened his fists. He wanted to yell, to smash something, to demand an opportunity to show that he wasn't doomed to commit the same transgressions as his father. Rather, he made his way to the window and gazed up at the Chancellor Estate's dark sky. He allowed the silence to descend on him for a moment. For the first time in a long time, Cain felt as though he was at a crossroads, even though he knew Colin's spirit wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. Either he allowed himself to relapse into that shadow, or he decided to continue battling against it. He was unable to do both. The plan is dead. He needed it to be, so he repeated it again, almost like a prayer, and his voice cracked. It was essential to his sanity. The complex and frequently confusing plot of the television show Power Book 2, Ghost is based on revolving loyalties, hidden secrets, and the ever-present, threatening possibility that past deeds will reappear and destroy the character's meticulously planned presence. A devastating flashback to the murder of her previous lover, Colin, immediately follows Monet Tejada's revelation to her son Cain regarding the paternity of her youngest children, Drew and Diana. This is one of the most significant and psychologically challenging moments in this ongoing story. This scene is a brilliant work of narrative that serves as a devastating emotional and psychological trigger, not just a dramatic revelation. Cain's abrupt and categorical statement that the plan is dead after this flashback is a turning point, a point of no return that permanently destroys the Tejada family unit, reshapes Cain's character development, and reveals the deep, destructive force of truth when memory uses it as a weapon. It is necessary to analyze the plan itself, the flashback's characteristics as a traumatic trigger, and the significant psychological shift that compels Cain to give up not only a tactic but also his entire worldview in order to fully comprehend the significance of his statement. On the surface, the plan in question was a simple and cruel exercise in Tejada family politics, the removal of the patriarch, Lorenzo Tejada, who had just been freed from prison. A complicated network of motivations led to the creation of this scheme. Monet saw Lorenzo's homecoming as an instant danger to her authoritarian rule over the family's drug business and outside affairs. In his absence, she had issued an uncontested ruling, and his re-entry required a submission that she refused to make. Additionally, Lorenzo's traditional, too macho, and frequently violent style ran counter to the more subtle, although no less lethal, techniques that Monet and her children had created. His goal to re-establish patriarchal rule was a direct threat to Monet's authority, and his presence was a destabilizing influence. The motivation was complex for Cain. Being the oldest son, Cain's whole identity was based on his devotion to his mother and his intense, frequently unrequited, want to win her acceptance and acknowledgement as her main soldier and heir apparent. Cain's role as the family's de facto enforcer was put in jeopardy when Lorenzo returned. Instead of seeing Cain as a valued lieutenant, Lorenzo saw him right once as a wild cannon and an impetuous liability. Cain saw the plan to assassinate Lorenzo as a means of securing his own position of authority within the family, proving his worth to Monet, and eliminating a rival for her approval. His skill set and his comprehension of family dynamics were well suited to this forceful solution, which eliminated threats with finality. But there was a lack of important information in this proposal. Both Cain and the audience were acting on the long-held belief that Lorenzo was the Tejada children's biological father. This presumption gave the planned patricide a certain Shakespearean seriousness. It was a vicious attempt to seize control that followed the well-known, if perverted, logic of a criminal family. This basis is totally destroyed by the revelation that Monet gives Cain. Everything Cain knows about his family is completely recalculated when she confesses that Colin, not Lorenzo, is the father of Drew and Diana. The family unit is suddenly exposed as a skillfully constructed facade and a work of fiction. Suddenly, the guy Cain was planning to kill and thought was his father is reduced to a cuckolded stepfather figure. It has come to light that the siblings he thought shared both parents are actually merely half-siblings, linked only by their mother. Any reasonable individual would be prompted to reconsider their allegiances and motivations by this information alone. The blow is existential for a man like Cain, whose identity is so closely linked to his family. But the revelation is not the only thing that causes him to abruptly and firmly give up on the goal. The psychological detonation is the ensuing, most likely uncontrollable flashback of Colin's murder. The secret to unlocking a deeply buried and horrific memory is Monet's confession. Although Cain's flashback's entire substance is not shown to the audience, the context and his gut reaction make it incredibly obvious. It is implied that a young Cain saw his biological father, Colin, die at the hands of his mother, Monet, or maybe had some involvement in it. This is the unsaid horror that has persisted behind Cain's character's exterior, a repressed trauma that now bursts into his mind like a repressed nightmare. The flashback offers the graphic details and poignant reality, and your mother killed him, while the confession supplies the narrative structure, Colin was your father. This combo has catastrophic psychological effects. It reframes the story of his whole existence. In addition to being a vicious queenpin, his mother, to whom he has sworn unwavering allegiance, killed his biological father. He has reframed his love and devotion for her as a serious betrayal of his own ancestry. Lorenzo, the man he intended to murder, is suddenly exonerated of the particular transgression of not being his real father. In fact, Lorenzo is another victim of Monet's, having been tricked into caring for another man's children. The flashback identifies his other parent as the culprit and makes Kane endure the basic anguish of losing a parent. This sets off a series of epiphanies. If Monet could so ruthlessly kill Colin, the man she ostensibly loved and the father of her children, what actual worth does the life of Lorenzo, whom she obviously despises, have? Even more horrifying is the question of how much Kane's own life is worth in her estimation. What would stop her from sacrificing Kane if he ever got in the way of her ambitions, if her love for Colin didn't hold her hand? Thus, this is a visceral, survivalist recalibration rather than an intellectual choice. The finality with which the sentence "the plan is dead" is conveyed goes beyond strategic consideration. It is the statement of a man whose whole world has been turned upside down. The basis on which the plan to assassinate Lorenzo was based is no longer viable. The act is now a possible reenactment of the original sin and a reenactment of the horror he just recalled, rather than a move to consolidate power for the Tejada family. Killing Lorenzo on Monet's orders would be complicit in the same betrayal that characterized his traumatic childhood. It would be to completely transform into his mother's creation, reliving the past rather than escaping it. He defies Monet's narrative control for the first time on his own when he abandons the plan. It is a psychological and physical act of self-preservation. The dynamics of the series are radically changed by the aftermath of this incident. Kane experiences a significant change in character. A man boiling with a new, more calculated rage has replaced the blindly devoted attack dog. Instead of pursuing Monet's favor, he now seeks justice, or at the very least, understanding, for the trauma she caused. His behavior becomes increasingly erratic and self-serving. He starts to openly challenge Monet's authority and pursue a different goal that frequently conflicts with her own. He has a new viewpoint as a result of the revelation, which increases his vulnerability and risk. Kane's newfound knowledge and the anger that goes along with it are the main causes of the internal cracks that start to appear as the unbreakable Tejada facade is exposed as a flimsy facade. Furthermore, Monet's persona is finally explained at this point. It exposes the depths of her cruelty and her unmatched manipulative ability. Her revelation was a calculated move rather than an act of maternal trust. In a desperate attempt to get Kane to comply, she used the ultimate truth as a weapon, conceitedly believing that his allegiance would triumph above any personal information. She undervalued the significance of the related trauma and the innate human desire to know one's own origins. One of her few crucial errors is not foreseeing the flashback and its repercussions, which costs her the steadfast allegiance of her most successful enforcer. It reveals that, despite her enormous power, it is not absolute and that the past she has buried might always come back to haunt her. The series repeatedly contends that the ghosts of past deeds are the real enemies of its protagonists, and Kane's flashback and his declaration that follows are a potent commentary on the unavoidability of the past inside the universe of power. Violence, lies, and secrets don't stay hidden, they rot and change, coming to the surface at the worst times to ruin the present. This notion is perfectly embodied in Kane's trip. His present and future are drastically altered as a long-kept secret. The truth about his paternity and his father's murder erupts into his existence. The intention to assassinate Lorenzo was a proactive tactic meant to ensure the Tejada Empire's survival. That future is immediately rendered impossible by the flashback, which is a quick and forceful intrusion of the past. It serves as a sobering reminder that in this fictional world, one cannot just move on without the repercussions of what has been left behind pursuing them relentlessly. The plan is dead after Colin flashback, as Kane puts it, is ultimately a deceptively straightforward remark that conceals a universe of psychological agony and narrative significance. It signifies the demise of Cain's previous persona as Monet's devoted son in addition to a strategic hit. It is the point at which Monet, the victimizer, unintentionally exposes the initial victimization that served as the foundation for their entire relationship, so creating her own most powerful enemy. In addition to facts, the memory conveys a horrifying emotional reality that Cain is unable to shake. It compels him to view his mother as a murderer and manipulator rather than a leader and guardian, and to view himself as a piece in a game that started with the betrayal of his own blood rather than as a devoted heir. His decision to reject the plan marks the beginning of a new and more perilous journey marked by a shattered sense of self and a strong desire to make peace between the man he has become and the painful reality of the youngster he once was. The return of a suppressed and intolerable truth has exposed the deception that underpinned the plan, making it dead.